So I've always wanted to make video games, right? It's been a dream of mine since I was a young kid, but pretty much all of my life I've gone in the complete opposite direction. You know, I left school early, I got a job in construction, I obviously never went to university. Now, obviously, I'm a prime fucking candidate, mate, to become a game dev. You know, it's only been in the last couple of years where I've decided this is something that I actually want to try and pursue. And before I started learning Blender, you know, I was messing around with Godot. This was about 2 years ago. You know, I was following tutorials, I was learning how to program and such. You know, this lasted for about a month before I downloaded Blender and shifted gears into that full time. And since then, you know, I've spent all of my time just studying and learning 3D art, and I'm loving it. You know, I've participated in some game jams, I've worked on some indie titles with like some smaller indie studios and stuff like that, but I'm still not quite satisfied. You know, I want to work on my own games as a solo developer, but I've kind of fallen into more of a 3D artist role. And that's not a bad thing, you know, like the skills and experience that I've gotten over these last few years are going to be invaluable to my ambitions. But I think it's time to shift gears again and start learning Godot. You know, I need to learn how to program. So that's pretty much what this series is going to be about. Me just learning how to make my own games, develop, program, and, you know, making video games. And don't worry, I'm still going to be making like Blender tutorials and trying to bridge that gap between 3D art and game development. This is just something that I want to do as a bit of a side project, you know what I mean? Now, it goes without saying, you know, I probably should have stayed in school, went to university and done things the proper way. But this is 2025, mate. You know, there's fucking an infinite source of information on the internet for basically next to nothing. You don't need no fancy degrees and formal education. And I'm 30 years old, mate. I'm not going back to school. Fuck that. You know, instead, I'm just going to jump over to gamedev.tv, pick up one of their courses that never seem to not be on sale, the cheeky bastards, and just power through one of those. You know, and that's exactly what I did. You know, I spent the next week just chugging through one of their courses on Godot 3D, and by the end of it, I retained about 0% of the information. But you know what? Fuck it. I'm ready to jump in and start making a game. So I started up a new project and was ready to start working. The only issue is that I have no idea what kind of game I'm going to try and make. You know, I spent a bit of time brainstorming, but every idea required programming skills that I just don't have. You know, after watching some devlogs on YouTube trying to find some inspiration, I decided to try and make a horror game. Now, this project also requires a long list of skills that I just don't have. But I'm a 3D artist and I really want to try and make like a spooky sort of environment. Now, one thing to know about me is I grew up playing a lot of World War II games. You know, I watched a lot of Nazi documentaries, Soviet documentaries, and I think that stuff just kind of stuck with me. Now, don't worry, I'm not one of these fucking idiots. I just really like the aesthetic. So I decided to create a game based inside like a Cold War era bunker. You know, number one, I feel like it just has like a cool charm about it and it has a nice aesthetic. And two, I feel like I can make it look pretty grim and spooky. So I headed over to Pinterest to get some inspiration and started working on a character controller inside of Godot. Now, in this learning journey, I'm trying to avoid using tutorials as much as possible, as well as ChatGPT. Instead, I'm trying to learn as much as I can from reading documentation. The thing is though, is I have no idea what the fuck I'm reading. Now, I want my character to move forward. When I press W, suddenly I've got to use a vector 3, multiply the velocity by the direction, and fucking delta comes in somewhere. Now, I didn't even finish high school, let alone pass any of my maths classes. So I did what anyone in this situation would do. I headed over to YouTube, had someone smarter than me explain it to me. I still don't get it, but at least we've got a moving character now. I messed around and gave him a little flashlight that you can turn on and off. And I did that all on my own, thank you very much. But in the process of adding a flashlight, I did something to the movement script and broke it. Now my character's not moving, and I think I spent literally an hour trying to figure out what broke. And I found out that the move and slide method had accidentally got indented into an if statement. But we're off to a good start. You know, my hair's getting grey by the minute, but we've got a moving character now, and I'm proud of that. I decided to jump into Blender and make a modular tunnel system so that I can just click together a bunker level in Godot, and bam, we've got a little tunnel guy. It's pretty bare bones, but it has potential. I threw in a staircase that you can start at the top of and descend down into the bunker when you start the game, and was just pretty much back and forth between Godot and Blender. Now, I was struggling to come up with a good map layout, but I ended up just throwing shit around and place some random rooms around as well. I made up some tube lights to stick around the map. You know, it's a horror game, and I feel like lighting is an important part to that. I had to move my camera so I could put the fucker on charge, but where were we? Right. Now, I'm still relatively new to Godot. You know, I don't really know how to create a good lighting system, but I messed around with it a bit, and I feel like it's looking alright. Now, something that no one warned me about was the insurmountable amount of fucking tasks that need to be done when you're developing a game on your own, only to not know what to do next. You know, it's very overwhelming. But in the fashion of a true beginner, I neglected all of the critical tasks and worked on audio. Now, I could pull out my old dusty MIDI keyboard and try and make something cool up for this game, but I'm not about to go all out on a project that I'm probably not going to finish. Instead, I racked some scary audio clips from freesounds.org and added them to the game instead. With a background sound added, it really added a lot of ambience to a horror game. You know, next, I decided to do some more coding and spent an embarrassingly long time trying to implement an open closed door system. Now, I'm not going to tell you what kind of dumb shit I tried coding, but it was pretty fucking bad. Now, I ended up managing though and jumped back over to Blender to create some assets to sort of fill the scene out with. I made up some pipes, some lockers, a table, and started filling out the empty space. The level was becoming a bit of an eyesore, and I feel like it really helped sort of tie things together, at least for me. At this point, I was realizing I probably made the map a little bit too big for a first project. You know, I'd spent more time working on art assets rather than learning how to program, which was kind of meant to be the whole point. It's not all bad though. I was starting to become much more familiar with the Godot game engine and was able to notice some flaws that I could improve in my Blender to game engine workflows. Now, I built a fairly sizable room over here and was trying to decide what to put in there. I'm not sure if it makes much sense, but I decided to turn it into like a bit of a sleeping quarters. So back into Blender, modeling and texturing some bunk beds and storage boxes and filling in the room with those assets. It still needs a lot more work, but it'll do for now. One issue I was having was when running into some of the walls, my character would actually get like stuck. Turns out collisions don't work very well when you're working with flat planes. So back over to Blender to fix the walls, and once that was done, it was working fine. I was getting pretty annoyed at the hard edges on all the tunnels, so I decided to give them a bevel while I was there too. I forgot to mention, I tried adding an enemy with the intent of having it follow you around the map and just add a bit of scariness to the game. But let's just say that turned out worse than you probably expected, and I decided to can that idea. Now, I feel like we're at a point where the game is still pretty bare bones, but it has a bit of potential. The only issue is I don't know what the fuck to do. I've got ideas, but like I don't know how to implement them. You know, I'm thinking I probably bit off a little bit more than I can chew. And maybe I should put this project to bed for now and just work on something a little bit more simple. Now, I want to come back to this in the future and give this game, you know, a bit more deserving attention when I know my way around GD script a little bit better. But yeah, I think I'm gonna leave it here for today. You know, still got a lot of stuff to learn, a lot of stuff to study and mess around with. So I'll probably continue doing this sort of stuff. Maybe I'll start a new game. Who knows? Maybe I'll continue with this one. No idea. But if you like it, leave a like, subscribe, yada yada. I don't know. Catch you next time.